Pour votre participation, nous vous souhaitons une expérience de partage et de croissance professionnelle et personnelle. Bon jubilé de la communication.
Dear fellow journalists and communicators from all over the world, welcome to the Jubilee of the World of Communications. We would like to extend a special greeting to all English-speaking participants. In a short while, Pope Francis will join us. The meeting with the Holy Father will be preceded by two speeches, one by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, and the other by writer Colum McCann, moderated by journalist Mario Calabresi. Through the Vatican Vox app, you will be able to listen to the live translation of the event in Italian, French, English, and Spanish. Besides these languages, the audience with the Pope will also be available live and on demand in German, Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, Portuguese, and Sign Language. We would like to remind you that the text of Pope Francis' message for the 59th World Day of Social Communications is also available on Vatican.va and the Vatican News website. Thank you for your participation. We hope that you enjoy.
Laudate Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Vatican Media, Vatican Radio and all my colleagues here at the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication. I'm Joseph Tulloch and I'll be providing the English language commentary for this live broadcast of the cultural meeting and audience with Pope Francis on the occasion of the Jubilee of the World of Communications. The event is taking place in the Paul VI Audience Hall in the Vatican. And you can see the images there of some of the people that have gathered. That's a wider shot. Thousands of journalists, communicators here for today's event. And a very warm welcome to them and to all of you, whether you're joining us via our Vatican News channels directly or via EWTN TV. So for the event today, we have basically two parts. There's an initial part, which is a cultural meeting, a dialogue between Maria Ressa and Colum McCann, which will be moderated by Mario Calabresi. That's the first part. That will be started very soon. And then at about 12:30, Pope Francis will arrive and will give a speech. And so that's the second half of the event. It's going to be quite a long one, almost 3 hours, we're thinking. And for this initial part, for the cultural meeting, there's going to be simultaneous translators. So very soon I'm going to be handing you over to the simultaneous translators. And then I'll be back at about 12:30 when the Pope arrives to translate the Pope's words to the people gathered here today. And all of this is taking part as part of the Vatican's, or the churches, I should say, the Catholic Church's Jubilee for Communications. This is, of course, part of the broader Jubilee year. The theme of that Jubilee year is Pilgrims of Hope. Pilgrims of Hope. And in a context of war. So one of the really urgent questions that the Church is asking over this period is, what does it mean to communicate hope in this fairly bleak global context? So as I said, soon we'll be getting started with the first part of the event today. That's this conversation between Calabresi, Ressa and McCann. Right now there's just a few announcements being made in various languages. There's, as you can see from the images, there's a huge amount of people here from all over the world, and obviously people who speak different languages, and so translations being made into various different languages by some of my colleagues here at the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication. As I said, we'll be getting started soon. Maybe a few words before we start about some of our speakers. So one of those is Colum McCann. He was born in Ireland. He's a best-selling author. He's written 14 books. Let the Great World Spin is one of those. He has won the US National Book Award and several other major international prizes, and also been nominated for an Oscar. So very accomplished guy. His work has been published in over 40 languages, and he's the co-founder of the global organization Narrative 4, which equips I'm reading here from its self-description. It equips young people to harness the power of storytelling to drive change within their communities. And he'll be talking to Maria Ressa, who I actually can't find her bio at the moment. Apologies for that.
Em breve, teremos a presença do Papa Francisco e o encontro com o Santo Padre será precedido por
So now just the event being introduced in Portuguese. Those of you who tune in regularly to Vatican News will recognize some of these readers from the Pope's general audience on Wednesdays. So these are some of my colleagues at the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication, and one of their jobs is to translate the Pope's words into various languages at the Wednesday general audiences. And here now they're acting as the translators for this big international event with people coming from all over the world.
Lembramos que vocês têm à disposição o texto da mensagem do Papa Francisco para a 59º Dia Mundial das Comunicações Sociais, no site oficial da Santa Sé.
And I said that Colum McCann, who I was talking about earlier, would be talking to Maria Ressa. She's a Filipino and American journalist, and she's the co-founder and CEO of Rappler. It's a really major news organization in the Philippines. She also worked for CNN, and she's been a professor of professional practice at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. And so that's, as I said, that's the first part of today's event, will be that dialogue between her and Colum McCann. And that will last probably about 2 hours. We're not entirely sure about the timings.
أوجه تحية خاصة للمشاركين الناطقين باللغة العربية. بعد قليل.
And of course, today's event is just one part of the events for the Church's Jubilee for Communications that started yesterday. There was a big penitential liturgy at the Basilica of St. John Lateran. That was yesterday evening. So a welcome event and a penitential liturgy, and that was followed by a mass for the feast of St. Francis de Sales. He's of course a patron saint of communicators, and I think the reason that the Jubilee for Communications has been organized for this weekend is precisely because it's when his feast day falls. And today some of the participants took part in a pilgrimage to the Holy Door in St. Peter's Basilica. They now have this meeting, first of all the cultural dialogue, and then the meeting with the Pope, and then there'll be some more events in the afternoon. There'll be a panel discussion with some different communicators and journalists. And I think I will now hand you over to our simultaneous translators for that cultural dialogue between Colum McCann and Maria Ressa.
Drodzy koledzy dziennikarze, drodzy specjaliści do spraw mediów z całego świata, witamy Was na jubileuszu Świata Komunikacji. Szczególnie serdecznie pozdrawiamy uczestników mówiących w języku polskim. Już niedługo dołączy do nas papież Franciszek. Spotkanie z Ojcem Świętym poprzedzą 2 wystąpienia. Laureatki Pokojowej Nagrody Nobla Marii Ressy oraz pisarza Columa McCanna, a moderatorem spotkania będzie dziennikarz Mario Calabresi. Za pośrednictwem aplikacji Vatican Vox mogą Państwo słuchać tłumaczenia na żywo w językach włoskim, francuskim, angielskim i hiszpańskim. Oprócz wymienionych języków, audiencja z Ojcem Świętym będzie transmitowana także w językach niemieckim, arabskim, chińskim, portugalskim oraz w języku migowym. Przypominamy, że mają Państwo do dyspozycji tekst orędzia papieża Franciszka na 59. Światowy Dzień Środków Społecznego Przekazu, dostępny na oficjalnej stronie Watykanu i w portalu Vatican News. Dziękując za Wasz udział, życzymy Wam doświadczenia wzajemnego dzielenia się oraz zawodowego i osobistego wzrastania. dobrego przeżycia jubileuszu komunikacji.
Benvenuti e grazie di essere qui così tanti da così tanti paesi, 138 paesi.
138.
Non elenco tutti i paesi perché sono 138. Siamo così tanti che certamente non ci conosciamo tutti e possiamo approfittare allora di questi giorni e anche di adesso, mentre aspettiamo il Papa, per conoscerci meglio l'un l'altro. Servirà a costruire una rete di buon giornalismo e di buona
Good journalism and communication. I will begin by introducing myself first. I am Paolo Ruffini. I'm a journalist. I'm one of you. I'm the prefect of the Dicastery for Communication at the Holy See.
Ciò che ci riunisce qui
What brings us here is the Jubilee of the world of communication and the wish to share a reflection on how the way in which we communicate could be improved and how this could change our lives and the lives of others, and how this hope for those who believe, well, many people here, most of us, but of course we also welcome those who do not yet have the gift of faith. So this hope is rooted into something that transcends us, which is faith. We are here to question ourselves on how and if we can still communicate hope in a world which is in a state of crisis, with war. We must consider how to continue thinking about communication about people, not among machines, and how technology can be guided, how we can grant freedom, how we can share knowledge, how difficult it is to look for truth, and how easy it is to spread false news, how important dialogue is, and how powerful it can be to share our stories, how stories change things, and how communication can be what keeps us together, or else it can be the poison that affects our communities and humanity as a whole. These are issues that challenge our personal and collective responsibility, and that affect also the way in which we conceive journalism, but also technology and the economics. And they also concern the difference between the protection and the conservation, storage of data, because we all provide tons of data, which is food for algorithm, as the Pope said. So our role and yours is great. What has brought us here to meet the Holy Father on such an occasion, what pushes us is the willingness, the intention to go back to the roots of our work, job, our vocation as communicators, journalists, storytellers, at the root of our hope. So we have to question ourselves, all of us, believers and non-believers, about the ultimate meaning of our work, of our job, and start again from here, understanding how and if we can build in truth a hope of a future for everybody, for all of us, and tell everybody about it in the freedom of cultures and the religions of everybody, in dialogue, with creativity, also resorting to technology, and also considering the economy of the system of communication. Very shortly we're going to listen to the words of Pope Francis. In the meantime, we will have the chance of listening to some reflections from authoritative speakers, concrete reflections by Maria Ressa, a Filipino journalist which now lives in the US, co-founder of the information website Rappler, a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2021, a courageous example of journalism, free journalism. Thank you for being here, Maria. And we will also listen to the words of Colum McCann, journalist and writer from Ireland. He lives in the United States. His novels make you a part of history as history unfolds and allow us to enter mechanisms of hope. Colum has also created a narrative for an organization which is based on the transformative power of stories. Thank you, Colum, for being here with us. And Mario Calabresi is a writer and journalist too, and he has a personal and professional history that speaks about this precisely, and he's here with us, how we can hope and how we can change. And I'm handing it over to him to introduce and moderate this first meeting, which precedes the one with the Pope, and which is going to be preceded by a concert with Maestro Uto Ughi. Good morning. Good morning to everybody, and welcome to this meeting for the Jubilee of Communication, the world of communication. It is an opportunity to reflect on the duties and the opportunities afforded to us by communication, and on the need to work to build hope and trust. So the question to start from, I think, cannot be but the following. Can we still communicate hope? Or we could perhaps say, can we still communicate with hope? Or our days are just marked by desperate storytelling, an information in which evil is the absolute protagonist, in which crime news is our daily bread, an information in which rage and hatred are the air we breathe, where propaganda daily builds an enemy, a culprit, someone to blame for our struggles, our pains, our fears. An information in which we get used to cultivating mistrust, to seeing in others not human beings, not people who look like us and who have our same needs, our same desires, our same dreams, and even our same fears, but in which people are to be kept away, people are to be considered as an enemy, an adversary, or worse, an enemy. But evil must be told. No one here imagines, and we will not do so this morning, of course, that the narrative or reality must be painted pink, that tragic, painful and negative facts must be hushed up, that an alternative, good and reassuring reality must be imagined. But a storytelling focusing on evil alone cannot be the only way. It cannot occupy all space. It cannot be the only way, key to read the world. It cannot be the engine of information alone, because even within evil there are and can be perceived elements of good. There are people and moments that speak a different language, signs of resistance, of building alternative situations. But we seem to have become incapable of grasping this. And yet, those are the moments of salvation. Those examples of good are the footholds that help us not to fall into the abyss and become prey to despair. These are the things that can speak to us of hope and that can help us reconstruct trust in the others and humanity. The world is not all dark and scary. If we look around and we remove the lens which we usually use, we will see these throngs of people, army of people who every day build good things, maintain relationships, care, do not back down, constantly do their part. People who try to resolve situations, people who try to intervene. There are those who sacrifice themselves, those who take care, those who heal, those who seek truth, those who fight for justice, those who resist. We must be on their side. We must endorse their point of view, not that of a surrender to the inevitability of evil. There must be salvation. There can be salvation. The most important people capable of changing the terms of this discourse are in this hall today. So there needs to be responsibility, the responsibility not to champion evil in the belief that this will work, that this will make us heard, this giving us a greater audience and giving us attention. This is too easy and too simple a solution. So information that obsessively tells only about evil destroys society, and it robs us of the possibility of living and building. It takes away from us our trust, and it stifles hope. But in doing so, we would end up losing the sense of our mission, and we would be reduced to being sowers of anger, despair, hatred. On the contrary, we have the opportunity of being sowers of hope, builders of meaning, makers of change. So a good communicator, and we were told yesterday by Pope Francis, makes sure that those who listen, read or look can feel they can participate, they can feel close, can find the best part of themselves, and with this attitude enter into the stories they're told. We must be aware that we have the chance of choosing on which side to be, and we can do that every day. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce two extraordinary guests whose reflections we will be hearing shortly, and I will turn to English.
I would like to introduce this panel with these two outstanding guests, Maria Ressa and Colum McCann. Maria Ressa co-founded Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. As Rappler's CEO, Maria has endured constant political harassment and arrests by the Duterte government. For her courage and journalistic integrity, Maria has received numerous awards. In October 2021, she was one of two journalists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of her efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. In 2022, she was appointed by the United Nations Secretary General to the leadership panel of the Internet Governance Forum. She is a professor of practice at the Institute of Global Politics, Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where she leads projects related to artificial intelligence and democracy. Her most recent book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, has been translated into more than 20 languages. Please, Maria, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wow. So I'm going to pretend to be taller than I am by standing in front of you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. My gosh, this is daunting here, by the way. It feels like a momentous time. This is a sacred space, and we're kicking off the Jubilee at this time of grace, of reflection, and of recommitment to the values that bind us together as a global community. This comes just in time as we are living through a profound transformation of our world. The last time something like what we are living through today happened, when new technology enabled the rise of fascism, was 80 years ago. That was also roughly around the last time a journalist was given the Nobel Peace Prize, except Karl von Ossietzky wasn't as lucky as I was. He languished in a Nazi prison and couldn't accept the award. For many years now, I've sounded the alarm. Just like in Hiroshima, an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem. In pursuit of power and money, technology enabled insidious manipulation at the cellular level of all of our democracies, of us, the people, the voters, micro-targeting fear, anger, and hate, seeding meta-narratives that destroyed trust. It created what the US Surgeon General called an epidemic of loneliness. It turned neighbor against neighbor, rewarding mob rule, rewarding the worst of who we are as people. Journalists were the first attacked. If you want power, tear down our credibility. This I know firsthand. I lived through it. My government targeted me with an average of 90 hate messages per hour. It functions like fertilizer, right? Hashtag arrest Maria Ressa trended on social media 2 years before I was actually arrested. What seems impossible becomes possible with repetition. I was arrested and I first posted bail, and I can't forget it because it was my government's gift to me on Valentine's Day in 2019. In a little over a year, my government filed 10 arrest warrants against me. I began to do a workflow for posting bail. I didn't know what was going to happen, but Rappler and I just tried to do what was right. And now, 8 years, almost a decade later, those 10 criminal charges are down to 2. Still 2. In order to be here in front of you today, I have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. So you lose your rights. The sad part, I always joke that the Philippines has moved from hell to purgatory, but the sad part is that I see what has happened to us in the Philippines happening to far more developed countries around the world. The vote in America I called the Philippinization of American politics. This Jubilee comes at a time when the world is upside down, when what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right. I remember an old cartoon when I was growing up and learning about making decisions of conscience. Every major religion has that. The hardest battle to fight is inside yourself. Islam calls it the jihad. That's the battle inside yourself. But you remember this cartoon if you're my age, right? On your right, you have the devil telling you, egging you on, saying, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And then on your left, there's this angel reminding you of empathy, of other people, of the golden rule, do the right thing, be kind. Well, telling you not to be selfish, to share, to fight your worst instincts. Devil and angel. What social media did was to kick the angel off your shoulder, grow the devil, and give it a direct line into your nervous system. Big tech transformed social media from a tool of connection into a weapon of mass behavioral engineering. These platforms are not neutral technologies. They're sophisticated systems designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. They monetize our outrage and hate, amplify our divisions, and systematically erode our capacity for nuanced thinking, our capacity for empathy. In 2018, an MIT study showed that lies spread 6 times faster on social media, and that was before Elon Musk bought Twitter. You tell a lie 1 million times, it becomes a fact. If you make people believe lies are facts, then you can control them. The business model of big tech pushes this. I'll say the same 3 sentences I've said over and over. Kind of feels like Cassandra and Sisyphus combined, but I'll say it again because we're in here. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we have no shared reality. We can't begin to solve any problem, let alone the existential ones like climate change. We can't have journalism, communications. We cannot have democracy. Surveillance capitalism, that business model, is built on a fundamental betrayal of human dignity, where data privacy has become a myth and AI and algorithms have cloned and manipulated us. Three things: it created echo chambers that exacerbate existing biases, prioritized conflict over understanding, monetizing human attention, each of us, at the expense of social cohesion. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate design, an architecture for profit that brings in hundreds of billions of dollars a year to these companies. The hard part: what happens on social media doesn't stay on social media. There's only one of us, one you, living in both the physical world and the virtual world. Big tech hacked our biology, incited the worst of our emotions, fear, anger, and hate, because it changed the way we feel, it changes the way we look at the world, it changes the way we act, it changes the way we vote. Do we still have individual agency? We can see the trend. As of last year, VDEM said that 71% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. We are electing illiberal leaders democratically. After all, how can we have integrity of elections if we don't have integrity of facts? It's like we're standing on wood that's being eaten away by termites, and we just don't know when it will collapse. But something changed last year. In December, Romania became the first country around the world to void an election because of Russian manipulation of social media. They voided the election because of Kremlin interference. Now imagine if the UK in Brexit or the US in 2016 was brave enough to have taken those actions and prevented impunity. Electoral protests are happening all around the world, from Venezuela to Mozambique to Georgia, where large-scale protests began mid-April last year, but starting December, it was daily. And today is the 60th day when mass protests in Georgia are out in the streets. Journalists, activists, beaten and jailed. The journalists carried my book in the protests. The title, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. Investigative journalist Maria Ressa today starts her 14th day of a hunger strike from jail. She said, "Because I cannot stand by in silence." I've shown data for years now of how different countries around the world show that technology is the match that sets the world's dry kindlings on fire, right? So move fast, break things. That's what Mark Zuckerberg said, and big tech broke democracy. It's going to get worse. Early this year, a few weeks ago, he announced that Facebook is giving up on facts. It's canceling what it created, the fact-checking that's trying to, it's like putting a finger in a dam that's about to fall on you. But, dear Mark, this isn't a free speech issue. This is an issue of safety. Imagine if this hall had no safety measures and it was built of corroded materials and could fall on us at any time. How many more people will have to die? In 2018, the UN and Meta's own team independently went to Myanmar and found that Facebook enabled genocide. That was in 2018. Yet no one was held accountable. Online violence is real-world violence. This is something I've learned. I had to have closed-in security. We increased security in Rappler, Little Rappler, 6 times in less than a few months. From Myanmar to Gaza, to Ukraine, to Sudan, online violence feeds into real-world violence, and they all feed into each other. Add Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, the other forgotten battlegrounds around the world. These wars are fought not just with missiles and tanks, but with algorithms, disinformation, and the systematic destruction of truth and our communities of trust. Information warfare, geopolitical power play is exploiting these platforms' design. Remember, the goal is not to make you believe one thing. The goal is make you doubt everything so you cannot act. Globally, two main fracture lines of society that is pounded open, regardless of country or culture. That's gender and race. And the attacks are often fueled by religion. Sexism that turns into misogyny, and racism that finds its way into constitutions like Hungary, where it's called white replacement theory. You hear it in the news as immigration or inflation, but if you dig deeper, you will see gender and race. A few years ago, we in Rappler decided that the empty promises of big tech, that we've kind of had enough, and so we began building a public tech stack for the virtual world, where real people can have real conversations without being manipulated for power and money. We rolled out a Matrix protocol chat app a little more than a year ago. It is open source, secure, decentralized. It is used by countries that value data privacy. France, Germany, their websites are on the Matrix protocol. Our vision is a federation of news organizations all around the world. It is the only way we will survive this moment. My colleague Paterno S. Makel will tell you more about it. I'm going to post the link for you to try it on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky. I'm sorry to send you there, but please come back to the Matrix afterwards. Because we are at the Vatican, I want to point out three things. First, technology rewards lies. Think about that. The first time I met Pope Francis, I said, Pope Francis, it's against the 10 Commandments. 2, the men who control this transformative technology wield godlike power, but they're far from God. They're only men whose arrogance, the lack of wisdom, and a lack of humility is taking the world down a dark path. Increasingly, by their own words and definitions, their unchecked and unaccountable power is resembling a cult. Which is why religion, faith, the Catholic Church, becomes more important today. In How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I write about how a simple idea, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, how that has guided me throughout my life. It helped define courage for me in a world that is increasingly shaped by lies. The courage to speak when silence is safer. The courage to build bridges when walls seem easier. And the courage to stand for truth even when it feels like the entire world is against you. I like the South African word, Ubuntu. I am because we are. It's an antidote to many of our problems today. It's a universal truth that our faith communities embody. The pain of one is the pain of all. When big tech rewards the worst of who we are, Ubuntu teaches us that our fates are interconnected, that the fight for truth, justice, and peace is not someone else's battle, it is ours. Every single person in this hall. So what can you do? Thank you for waking up this morning. Now, I have 4 suggestions for you. 1, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Build and strengthen trust now to close the fracture lines of society that information operations will try to pound open, pitting one of us, each of us, against the other. 2, like Pope Francis, speak truth with moral clarity. Because silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Whether it's systemic racism, economic inequality, or the erosion of democratic norms, people of faith must reclaim, you must reclaim our prophetic voice. Demand transparency and accountability from those who control our public information ecosystems, from governments to big tech to media. 3, protect the most vulnerable. Support journalists, human rights defenders, and activists who risk their lives. Remember the Martin Niemöller quote from Germany? Here's our Philippine version, which was published by our largest newspaper after my first arrest. Here's the quote. First, they came for the journalists. We don't know what happened next. Your networks can be powerful shields for marginalized communities. Support immigrants, religious minorities, the LGBTQ+, and others who face discrimination. Our collective vigilance can prevent the normalization of hate. And 4, please, every one of us, recognize your power. Building peace is not reserved for heroes. It's the collective work of people who refuse to accept and live lies. Rappler could not have survived without the help of our community, always reminding me of the goodness of human nature. You are powerful and can be part of this tidal wave of change for the good. And that is powered by love. Sometimes that's hard to say as a journalist. So let me repeat them again. 4, collaborate, speak truth with moral clarity, protect the most vulnerable, and recognize your power. Even at the worst of times, hope is not passive. It is active, relentless, and strategic. Our faith traditions carry centuries of resilience. We need to share those stories of transformation. And finally, I'll leave you with this. There's this T.S. Eliot quote I love about the present moment of the past, this moment we live in. I always tell Rapplers, this moment, we want to do the right thing because a decade from now, when we look back, we want to say we did everything we could. T.S. Eliot, the present moment of the past, it's the idea that the latest novel you read is affected by the fact that you read Shakespeare when you were really young, or the Bible, but that your understanding and appreciation of the Bible, of Shakespeare, will be affected by the latest novel that you read. In this present moment of our shared past, we have a choice, and it will create our future as much as change how we look at our past. We can allow the fracture lines of our society to break open, or we can work to heal these growing divides. Because this is it. This time matters. What you choose to do matters. There's so many of us in this room. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the dicastery for bringing us together, to the Vatican, to the Pope. Imagine if we all worked together. We just might stem the tide, stop the dam from falling, and heal our world. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think we have to stand up and to thank them. Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the state of journalism and communication with us. It's so important to remember that without facts, you can have truth. Without truth, you can have trust. Without these three, we can't have journalism. We cannot have democracy. Thanks a lot. Colum. Born in Ireland, Colum McCann is the best-selling author of 14 books, including A Paragon and Let the Great World Spin. He is the winner of the US National Book Award and several other major international prizes, as well as an Oscar nomination. His work has been published in over 40 languages. He is the co-founder of the global organization Narrative 4, which equips young people to harness the power of storytelling to drive change within their communities. And this experience, as you will hear in his speech, is fundamental in his message of hope. Thank you. Please, Colum.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Maria, for that extraordinary words of wisdom and advice and courage. A pilgrimage of repair. So, almost 100 years ago now, a series of letters went back and forth between Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. Einstein, the scientist, the father of relativity, was interested in the theory of everything. And Freud, known as the father of psychoanalysis, was interested, as you know, in exploring the brain and the body. Together, Einstein and Freud were the bellwether minds of their times. But a curtain of darkness had descended around the world. Europe had emerged from one devastating war, and although these two eminent scientists didn't know it for certain, the world was on the cusp of another disaster. Einstein wanted to explore humanity's, quote, lust for hatred, and so he wrote to Freud to ask him if he thought it might be possible to guide the psychological development of man so that it can become resistant to the psychoses of hate and destruction, thereby delivering civilization from the menace of war. A big, brave question. How might we deliver civilization from the rubble of war, and perhaps even in the process cultivate an idea of world peace? Now, when Freud replied, he told Einstein, sadly, that all his life he had been telling people truths that were difficult to swallow. In his opinion, there was very little likelihood of humankind being able to counteract the vast evils of war. Humanity, he said, has always had an active instinct for hatred and destruction, and it would not, in his opinion, ever be possible to eradicate it. Still, there was a crack of light. Ending war might be impossible in the absolute, but standing up against it and fighting for peace and for justice was not impossible. Anything, Freud said, anything that creates emotional ties between human beings must inevitably counteract war. What should be sought by humanity, said Freud, was a community of feeling and a mythology of the instincts. A community of feeling, a mythology of the instincts, what we might call today a story, or what we might also call a parable. So, we live right now in the most and least human of times. On the one hand, we have made spectacular leaps forward in science, in medicine, in art, and in technology. We have instant access to one another. We can recognize the texture of each other's lives from great distances. Our phones work, most of the time. Our switches work, our taps work, our satellites work, our medicines work. The machines of our lives blink on and off constantly. Yet on the other hand, and at the exact same time, we are living through the aforementioned epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So often we refuse to listen to one another. Our curtains get drawn across. Our windows get closed. We create divides between one another. We refuse to cross the street to help. We remain rooted in our own narrow canals of certainty. We tumble into the anonymity of our machines. And the tiny spaces that exist between one another grow wider and wider with every tick of the clock. The tension stretches the endpoints. It stretches and it stretches and it stretches until the snap occurs and the times break, like Maria said. Almost a whole century on from Einstein and from Freud, we are still asking ourselves the same questions. How do we avoid the wars that threaten to annihilate us? How do we counteract the effects of climate change? How do we ease the great geographic pressure of migration? How can we deal with issues of identity and issues of belonging? How can we recognize one another across those deepening divides? And how can we use our undoubted brilliance, our technology, our medicine, our artificial intelligence, and our faith to communicate with one another? If the world is built of molecules and atoms, it is also built of stories. The least distance between us is not a millimeter or even a picometer. It is a story. This is how we find one another. Our lives touch. Our ideas touch. We spin off one another. We create new energy. The quarks of our experience make new building blocks. We cast a wide net of understanding. The world becomes more deeply patterned. So our stories matter. They can change the course of history. They can rescue us. Stories are the glue that hold us together because we are nothing, absolutely nothing, if we cannot communicate with one another. This is even more applicable when we get a chance to understand the stories of those who are seemingly different and seemingly distant to us. We stop, we listen to others, and we become bigger than ourselves. The world is, in fact, made of the stories of others, even those that we don't know, and maybe in particular, those that we don't know or don't yet know. So, who can deny the humanity of the person when you have just heard his or her or their story? Who can slam a missile into a marketplace when you know the story of the woman who owns the fruit stand? Who can allow their politicians to refuse an emergency food truck into a war zone when you have heard the story of the child wasting away in the darkness? And who is going to be able to close the border gate on the wheelchair-bound boy who's traveling for life-saving treatment? Who? Let us ask ourselves that question this morning. Who? Who? And let's just pause a moment, because perhaps the brutal and unfortunate truth is that in today's world, increasing numbers of us can. The crux of our contemporary dilemma is not so much silence as it is the act of silencing. When we refuse to listen to the stories of others, or more poignantly, when we refuse to let others tell their stories at all, or even more poignantly still, when we annihilate the stories of others, the world becomes a spectacle of narrowness. So our refusal to step beyond ourselves, or at least those who don't look like us, or sound like us, or vote like us, is at the core of our possible doom. This dangerous tightening has the capability of shutting us down entirely. Like an artery that has become blocked, we cut off our lifeblood, the heart surrenders. We must retreat into the jail of self. We cannot love our neighbor anymore because we have no neighbor but ourselves. And when we have no neighbor but ourselves, we have no meaning beyond the solipsistic gaze. So who are we if we are only ourselves? We become the very emptiness that we fear. The same emptiness that Maria just talked about. We allow great crimes to occur, the destruction of our environment, the annihilation of our neighbors, the proliferation of poverty to occur. We wire ourselves for meaninglessness. So if we, as a government or a church or a community, can deny another person their story, we can deny their very existence. This is a powerful and insidious weapon. It can sow fear, it can isolate, it can dehumanize. Fear sells, ignorance sells. Hatred, because of fear and ignorance, takes a foothold. And yes, lies abound, rumors abound, gossip abounds. A story denied is not made equal by a lie being told. This is where the imbalance of power comes in. Power is very well aware that you own and indeed limit the story of others. If you do so, if you limit their stories, you own everything, even the person themselves. The true story of our neighbors, nuanced and contradictory and intensely human, gets lost. The truth is put in handcuffs and then imprisoned. Without a story, the proximity and even the very existence of others is annihilated. It happens publicly in many places: Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, but it also happens closer to home, deep within our own hearts too. So the nullification of the stories of our supposed enemies, who are really just our neighbors, is one of the world's most insidious weapons. Our lack of access to the nuanced and meaningful stories of other people, along with the refusal to create places where we can listen, is one of the greatest dangers that we face today. So, if we live in broken times, what is the new theme? Well, the new theme must be repair. And how do we repair what is obviously broken? Einstein's opinion was that some healing would come about in the form of world government. Out of this, organizations like the United Nations were born. His idea was that world leaders would be able to guide us towards some sort of coherence. But beautiful as it was, it has not worked in the way we would have wanted. So much good has come from these global bodies, but we still find ourselves at the deepening coalface of doom. The approach in decades gone by has been to treat power from the top down. Our leaders pressed their ideas upon us from above. Decisions were made at the highest level and filtered down through a hierarchical structure. At the time, and still today, it was usually assumed that our leaders, and our technology leaders as well, had our best interest in mind. But we live now in an age that recognizes the principle of emergence. The theory of emergence states that a multitude of any number of tiny things, neurons, bacteria, ants, people, can exhibit properties way beyond the capability of one individual. Flocking birds, for example, can display emergent qualities, wheeling across the sky in seamless formations. Honeybees become so much more startling when they work in unison. Groups of people like us can possess intelligence, or indeed our own stupidity, far greater than the sum of its parts. So storytelling too can exhibit the possibility of emergence in this fractious day and age. And sharing our stories alongside listening to the stories of others might be one of the things that can save us. So, storytelling and story listening is a call to action. It is indeed a form of prayer. At Narrative 4, the global non-profit organization which empowers young people to create change through storytelling and story listening, we have found a simple formula to initiate change. You tell my story, I tell yours. In the first person, face to face. Not a didactic story, but a personal story. Not something designed to win an argument, but something that stirs your heart, stirs your soul. A parable, if you will. Something that accesses the truth without being declarative. Something that is humble, something that is kind, something that bows its head. Something, or rather someone, who listens. We have run the Narrative 4 program in Ireland, Mexico, United States, Nigeria, South Africa, Italy, and dozens of other countries around the world. So, this change, it begins in our classrooms, because what happens in our classrooms happens for the rest of our lives, and then it moves from the classrooms outward, across the city, across the country, across oceans, building a latticework of connection. Young people soon realize that personal storytelling, in personal storytelling, we are so much more alike than we are different. In doing this, we dwell not only in somebody else's story, but we hear our own being told back to us. And in the process, this simple but astounding process, we recognize one another's common humanity. In his message for the 54th World Communications Day, Pope Francis wrote, "Amid the cacophony of voices and messages that surround us, we need a human story that can speak of ourselves and of the beauty around us. a narrative that can regard our world and its happenings with a tender gaze, a narrative that can tell us that we are part of a living and interconnected tapestry, a narrative that can reveal the interweaving of the threads which connect us to one another. Look around. Just for a moment, look around right now and feel how we can, with a tender gaze, be connected to one another. The act of listening generously and the act of telling generously bolsters our very notions of peace, equality, democracy, and understanding. Stories can lead to action, which can lead to change. Rather than being applied from the top down, it is gathered from underneath. It comes from you. Even if we disagree with one another, even if we live across a border from one another, even if we have vastly different histories, even, in fact, if we dislike one another. I have been blessed to have had the chance to write about two fathers, one Israeli, one Palestinian, Rami Elhanan and Bassam Aramin. Despite losing their daughters in separate incidents in the conflict, they have become good friends. And even more startling, they have maintained their friendship. They travel the world together, telling and sharing their stories. Their philosophy is simple and yet profound. What they say is this: we don't have to love one another. In fact, we don't even have to like one another, though we hope that we could. But we pray we must understand one another. And so, these men continue to travel, and they continue to tell their stories, and they have become, like you, pilgrims of hope. So this is the task that belongs to all of us: scholars, writers, mechanics, clerics, chefs, housekeepers. But in particular, it belongs to our teachers and our journalists, who are uniquely positioned to guide this principle of emergence. Among the pilgrims of hope that we salute here today, the teachers and the journalists and the communicators are the ones who guide us, uniquely positioned to help tell the stories of other people. They understand that for a story to be told, it must be properly listened to. These stories and the understanding of others can go outside the classroom, outside the newsroom, outside this hall, across the street, across the city, across the country, across the oceans, from continent to continent. And this then becomes our pilgrimage of repair, a community of feeling, a mythology of the instincts. As pilgrims, we bow our heads on the rocky road and we move on, carrying our humanity, but most importantly, the humanity of others from one place to the next. Now, if all of this has the sound of a clarion call, then so be it. It is a clarion call. We live in very dangerous times. We cannot afford to ignore the stories of others. Will storytelling and story listening save the world? Possibly, possibly not. But it certainly will, at the very least, allow a ray of light and understanding. And where there's one ray of light, we all know, there is the possibility of many more collaborating, working together until at least a portion of this darkness is pierced. So simply, at first, being interested in one another is a triumph. I ask you again just to turn around a moment and look at one another. Being interested in one another and the person that you don't know is a triumph. Imagine how many triumphs can come about when we learn to understand and like, or maybe even love one another. Ordinary people with our ordinary stories and our ability to connect. The shortest distance between being an enemy or a neighbor is a story. Now, the cynics will say that we're wrong. They will say that we're naive and that we're sentimental. But on the contrary, perhaps it is naive and sentimental to refuse hope. Cynics live in the clouds of their own understanding. They refuse to take a pilgrimage to elsewhere. They stay where they are, they close the curtains, they shut down the GPS on their own imaginations. Does this mean that we should isolate the cynics and pass them along the way? No, of course not. On the contrary, we must embrace them with hope. Listen to them, bow our heads, share our stories, listen to others, find common ground, and then move on in the hope that we have left some healing behind. And finally, in this exponential age, as the brokenness multiplies, the fundamental essence of repair is that we need to know one another. To know one another, we need to listen and we need to communicate. After listening, we need to understand, and then respectfully and joyfully and courageously, we can begin to initiate change. May the Lord bless and save you all. Mila buikas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your touching speech. Really, thank you so much. Okay, now we have the privilege of a special concert. Let me speak in Italian to introduce Maestro Uto Ughi. I introduce Uto Ughi, then we have to move, I think. È con grande piacere che vi presentiamo un breve concerto del maestro Uto Ughi, uno dei più grandi interpreti della musica classica, accompagnato dalla sua orchestra. Questo evento è promosso dalla Fondazione Uto Ughi, impegnata nella diffusione della musica classica, nel sostegno ai giovani talenti e nella valorizzazione del patrimonio culturale italiano. Il programma di oggi prevede un
Today's program will be marked by a concert by Johann Sebastian Bach and Oblivion by Astor Piazzolla. I invite you to give a warm welcome to Maestro Uto Ughi and his orchestra. This event is promoted by the Uto Ughi Foundation, which is committed to disseminating classical music, supporting young talents and enhancing Italy's cultural heritage.